highlights of the year was meeting this person actually in person, having met her virtually and connected many times, Hannah Wilson. So I'm going to add Hannah on to the screen. Good evening, Hannah. How are you?
Hi, Ben. Hi, team. I'm very good, thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. So Hannah actually spoke at our London event. She had just got off a plane from Dubai and ran our keynote session, which was at the end of the day, all around legacy, and ran a session as well, a workshop for us as well. And Hannah's been someone that I've followed for many years. And I think some of the things, if we think about what Christine was just talking about there, things like values-led leadership, inclusion, and all of those things, that I know that Hannah embodies all of those in her leadership journey. If you don't know who she is, she's a leadership development consultant, coach, and trainer, and is the co-founder of Women Ed and Diverse Ed, and currently serves as the director of Diverse Educators, which, as it's phenomenal, I'm sure many of you will agree, to go from a grassroots network to now a registered organisation providing services to schools and support schools across the world. And Hannah is going to be speaking all about intentional networking. So I'm just going to get your slides ready, Hannah, and then it will be over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Do I have to do the next slide, please?
No, yeah, if that's sorry to throw back to the regime. I will disappear, but I am in the background clicking for you.
It's all good. Thank you very much. So it's great to be here. So networking, I think, is perhaps my middle name. I've spent quite a lot of time networking through my career. I spent 20 years in the system, and I've been working as a support to the system for the last 5 years. And I was thinking about the title. Like, for me, I wanted to think about the power of networking and the impact it can have on us individually and collectively. But I also want us to think about how to network intentionally, so we are optimizing the little time and energy we actually have to be able to do it. So next slide, please, Ben. We always start everything with the Simon Sinek golden circles. There's an echo there. So I want you to think about these 3 questions for yourself. You're all going to be at different starting points when it comes to you and networking. So the first question, the why question, why do you network, or why do you need to network? So a slightly different question there based on whether you do it yet or whether you want to do it better. The how questions, how do you currently network, and how might you network more effectively? Because I really want you to think about the purpose of the networking and whether you're getting out of it what you need, because otherwise, without being rude, you're wasting your time and your energy. So making sure that it's really intentional, but it's also being impactful. And what's your desired outcome of networking more intentionally? Okay, what would you like to get out of it? It might be as simple as you want to change schools or trusts, or you want to get a promotion. But being clear, having that clarity about what you want to get at the end of it, to keep checking yourself to make sure you're online, I think it's really important. So thank you. Next slide. And I just wanted to share this, just so we're really clear on what networking actually is. When I started talking about and blogging about networking, when Women Ed started about 9 years ago, it was a bit of a dirty word. I think networking has sort of like connotations of business, but also corporate. There were a lot of tensions in the system at the time about schools academising and maths being more corporate than perhaps the localities were. And so things like networking almost got associated with academies rather than schools. And I was working at one of the big London-based academy trusts at the time. So the idea of what we mean by professional networking, I think, is a curious concept. For you who have got friends outside of education, networking is an expectation. I've got friends who work in law, who work in health, who work in the media, and they are expected to network. They are expected to go to events, go to dinners, and meet people. If we had it in our job description, would we commit to it more? Okay, there's a question there to think about. If there was an expectation to do it, I have networked and got a lot of benefits from networking, and I recruited my whole staff when I was ahead through networking. So I had a team who were willing to network, and that brought value to our school and to our school community as well. So I think being clear on what we mean by it and what all the different kind of subcomponents. Christine mentioned like introversion as one of the potential barriers. Like some people don't want to do in-person networking. That's absolutely fine. There's other ways to network. You can network online. You can do things in the way that feels authentic to you. And for all of those of you who are volunteering as part of the Step Up Network, that is networking in itself. Okay, the idea of contributing to a kind of a wider goal, a bigger goal. So next slide, please, Ben. So I have got 7 tips for you. I was thinking of 7 days in the week. Let's break this down to 7 tips. And it's almost like we pre-planned this. I didn't actually get a briefing from the team, but like be values aligned. We've already heard that phrase from Christine. I want us to be really clear on our values and how our values should be guiding us when we are networking. There are people in education, thought leaders in education, who I'm not values aligned to. So I would not go to an event where they're speaking, or I would not go to their session if they were at that event, because we're not values aligned, particularly around inclusion. So being clear on who you are, what you believe, what you stand for, I think is that starting point, that internal clarity. And then making sure that you are growing a circle around you of people you are aligned with. I don't talk about values fit, I talk about values alignment. It's finding people who you can sit alongside, stand alongside, and there's some common ground there. You don't have to be absolute replicas of one another. When we talk about values fit with recruitment, that jars me, because no one should be shoehorning themselves into a mold created by someone else. Okay, so think about alignment and think about how you're kind of like magnetizing towards people who perhaps share similar core values and similar visions for education as you do. Thank you, Ben. Number 2, be visible. This one I find really curious. There are a lot of people who think they're networking. They are on socials. They've got no headshot. They haven't got a real name. They've got a series of digits. You don't know who they are, where they are, what they do. So you're kind of there, but you're kind of half there. And I'll give you the analogy. If any of you have gone through the pain of online dating, which is quite a painful experience, I would not date someone who didn't have a face and didn't have a name. So why would I connect with you on LinkedIn or on Twitter when there's no details about who you are and what you do? Okay, so being clear on where you exist, but how you exist, I think is really important. I would really recommend less is more. Some people join every platform, and I've got people on LinkedIn in my network who have been there for 10 years and it's not been updated in 10 years. I would say, what's the point of being there if you're not going to update it? And if you are going to be there, be accessible, be contactable. I think sometimes people get a bit overprotective and put their kind of their boundaries up, and no one can contact you or follow you. I would argue, what's the point of being there then? I've always had a very open door kind of policy that people can follow me and DM me and contact me. If people cross lines, I block them and I mute them and I stop connecting with them. So I think doing that housekeeping around your visibility is really, really important, and leads on to the next one, Ben, which I think is be consistent, isn't it? Yeah, be consistent. I see people show up online really inconsistently. They've got pictures of what they looked like 10 years ago with a different haircut or different hair colour. They've got different pictures on different platforms, different ways of spelling their name or talking about their name on different platforms. I really think regular housekeeping is quite key here about showing up consistently on different platforms with the same framing of your name, title, your same headshot, your same location, the same blurb. Okay, so when I do an update on LinkedIn, I go onto Twitter and update there, and go onto Instagram and update there, and go onto Facebook and update there for my professional accounts, so that you have that consistency. Because I am that former head teacher, that if you applied for a job with me, I would go and find you on all of those platforms and find out whether what's in the application is actually consistent with how you're showing up and what you're talking about, and what else can I find out about you that perhaps you haven't put in your application form. So I think consistency is really, really important. Next slide, please. So the idea of being intentional. When you go to events, whether they're virtual or in person, my intentionality or my strategic intent that I connect with people before I even go to the event. So I'll use the Step Up London event as an example. We've got set the schedule, I printed it out, I crossed out all the people I already knew and the people I was already connected with, and I went and found all the other speakers on LinkedIn and on Twitter. It took me about 10 minutes, but it meant that when I was then at the event, I was already connected with them. I could tag them into posts, and I could convert some of those virtual connections into real time. A lot of people were already posting on socials before the event and during the event. So there were a lot of people actually in the room who I hadn't seen for years. And I knew they were coming, I could go and find them. There were people like Ben who I've chatted to for years virtually, but I could then go and actually say hello to them. And there were other people who I didn't know were coming from my network. It was a lovely surprise to see them. Okay, so having that intentionality about why are you going to the event, who are you going to go and talk to or connect with. I go to conferences by myself on purpose, because when I go with friends, I'm more likely to sit and drink coffee and talk to them all day than I am to actually go and meet new connections. I appreciate safety in numbers. Some people might find that easier to go with people. Try and split up. Try not to like be glued together all day. And I will give myself a bit of a target that if I'm going to an event and there's people who I don't know or want to know, I will make sure I go to their session or I go and find them and say hello to them. And I always try to follow up. I might just drop a tweet or drop a DM on LinkedIn and say, hey, it was great to meet you. Here's my contact details. And I had quite a few people following the London event follow up with me. So you've then got a little bit more synergy and a little bit more sort of communication going. You then remember who they are for next time you see them. Next one, please, Ben. So being strategic is something to really consider here. I think sometimes people think that your network is are the people you already know. I want you to think about how you expand your sphere of influence and expand your circle around you to strategically think about your future career. So when I applied for headship back in 2016, my first headship interview was in Bath and the Bristol area, and my second interview that I got was up in Oxfordshire. I was already finding head teachers, chairs of governors, CEOs in those two regions and reaching out to them on LinkedIn. My second interview, the one I got, was for an all-through school, and I was finding head teachers who were all-through heads and other founding head teachers. So I was a startup head, so I could pick their brain before I got to the interview. So I was really intentionally building that circle around me. So when I'm coaching people who are aspiring assistant head teachers or aspiring deputy heads, head teachers, I say, like, think about how far you're prepared to work, travel to work, draw a circle, make a list of all the schools and go and find who you can on socials, particularly LinkedIn, who work in those schools. Follow those key people who, when jobs come up, they will be in your timeline. You can also follow the organisational accounts for schools, colleges and trusts. So I was often the first person to find out that there was a vacancy at a school down the road or a trust down the road, because I was following them on socials, which meant I had the advantage of getting in there quick with my kind of my initial request to go and do a visit, etc. So be strategic, be bold. The worst that can happen is that you send me a request on LinkedIn and I ignore it because I'm busy, or I don't accept it because I don't go on LinkedIn very often. I don't very often get declines. I don't very often get people who don't want to connect. Okay, so hold that positive regard, positive intent that everyone's there to network. Next slide, please, Ben. Be global. I think for me, this is the beauty of social media and platforms. I joined Twitter about 12 years ago. For about 3 years, I hated it and I left, and then I rejoined it, and that's when we then started Women Ed. And quite quickly, we went from being a national network to a global network. And I think one of the things that came out of lockdown for me was actually the fact that my network expanded globally. We hosted a virtual event in summer 21, and we had people from all over the world joining us, and it really took our network to the next kind of level. So finding people who do your role elsewhere in the world, people who share your passions and your interests, I think some of my biggest learning points and some of my biggest insights have actually been from listening to and learning from people in other countries. It's also led to invitations for me to go to conferences. I went to Canada back in 2017. I've done virtual conferences in Morocco. And as Ben said, I ended up doing some work in Dubai simply because of my network. And when I put on LinkedIn, I was talking at an event in Dubai. 3 heads who I didn't know contacted me and said, would you come and talk at our schools elsewhere in the region? So it very quickly snowballs and spawns. I think there's one more tip coming, Ben, if you could click on. Or is it my summary slide? Yeah, be mindful. I think this is actually the most important one for me. Being mindful with networking. I want you to be realistic and to manage your time and your energy. I know some people who almost network too much. They go to too many events. And I was probably guilty of that when I lived in London. When I was in my 20s and early 30s, I was going to a teacher meeting once a week. I was going to Saturday conferences all the time. I loved them. I met loads of amazing people who are now still in my network. And they're not only professional contacts, but they've become personal friends. But I did burn myself out at times, okay? So safeguarding yourself and managing your time and energy and being realistic about how much time and energy you're going to spend, and making sure that if you are going to spend time and energy on networking, that you are going to get something out of it. I've been to a couple of events where I've sat through the whole event and got home and thought, gosh, what did I actually get from that? I didn't learn anything. I didn't meet anyone. I'm just knackered now. Was it worth my time and energy? Did it add any value to me? So I think doing that audit is really important. And also manage your expectations. You're not suddenly going to get a new job or a promotion. You might have people who don't respond to you because they're busy. I get a lot of requests for, do you have 30 minutes to chat to me? And I would love to chat to everyone I meet in 30 minutes, but I have a limited amount of time. So I try to box clever and say, I haven't got time to meet you one-to-one, but I've got 8 people who want to talk about this theme. Can we all jump on a Zoom together? And actually that then helps people connect with other people as well. So that's one way of thinking about it. If you're the recipient of lots of requests, think about how you can actually collapse it and combine it so that you're not having 8 conversations repeatedly, you're having one conversation with 8 people. So if you go to the next slide for me, Ben, I wanted just to share some of the benefits, okay? Some of the benefits that I have taken from networking. I've probably been doing it for about a decade. I was in education for 20 years. I didn't network really for the first perhaps 9 years. And then it was actually when I became an assistant head teacher. I was the only female on an SLT. I then joined another school, and I was the only female as a deputy head. I needed to grow my circle around me. I consciously wanted to have a circle of trust around me, and that's why I was part of the founding team of Women Ed. And I wanted to have that circle of trust of other women leaders at my level to draw on and to learn from. So that's one of my benefits, and that circle continues for me. It's evolved over time, but I have got some very strong friends and friendships that have grown out of that networking. And my dad always laughs, like, you've got friends from Twitter who you go on holiday with, is it safe? But I've met some brilliant people. I've also been fortunate enough to receive lots of mentoring and coaching from people who have been very generous with their time, hence why I then pay it forward. And some of that mentoring and coaching has led to me having fantastic visible role models and sponsors, people who have opened the door for me, people who have said my name in rooms I'm not in and invited me to go to things. And anyone who does follow Diverse Ed and follows me will know that I lost one of them back at Easter. And it really devastated me that someone who had been that door opener for me passed very early in their lives. And I wrote a blog about the impact they'd had on me. Okay, so those role models are absolutely important. I didn't know I was going to get jobs from it. I didn't join Twitter and start doing events and speaking at events to get jobs. But I have subsequently met heads and CEOs through those networks who have then invited me to apply for jobs. And my headship actually came from one of those networking events. I can remember meeting the CEO at the Excel Centre, being introduced. He gave me his card. We went for a coffee. Next thing I know, I'm applying for a job and I get it. Okay, so doors have been opened. I've also been given book deals through networking. I haven't managed to do them all yet, but having invitations to contribute to thought leadership, lots of invites to be on podcasts, to blog, to contribute, to get out there, to like find my voice, use my voice, and to support others. I'm an avid traveller, so one of the benefits has been I've been invited to do things where I've perhaps tagged an event onto a holiday or had a holiday as a result of going to an event. And I didn't join any of these spaces and network to recruit, but my network grew. It was a very diverse network. It was people who was very values aligned to me. So when I became a founding head teacher and I was staffing a secondary school and a primary school, I didn't have to pay for any adverts because my network was there. I was already connected. I was hosting events. I put adverts out and we had an abundance of people applying. So if you are a head teacher, a deputy head, a CEO listening, like that, we don't network to get free staff, but you meet brilliant people and you get a real sense of who they are. And that's half the job when it comes to attracting and getting people to apply for jobs. I think my last slide, or second to last slide, if you want to click me on, please, Ben. The barriers, okay? It's not always easy. And these are some of the barriers that have come up, not necessarily for me, but for people who I support through networking. I think confidence can be a massive barrier. So having the confidence to even sign up and go to an event or to go to an event by yourself or to volunteer to speak at an event, I think that's something that you go on a bit of a journey with. And I've seen people join Twitter, have no face, then they have their face, then they follow some things, then they comment, then they start volunteering. And it's quite a trajectory, quite a continuum. I think there's a lack of training. I think if you can add a piece of value to your ECTs or your aspiring middle leaders and assistant leaders, SLTs, in your schools, have space where we're actually thinking about what does it mean to be a good networker. It's a skills gap. I think it's something we actually need to intentionally pay attention to and build. I think another barrier is lack of commitment, that we think we're doing it, we're not wholly doing it. And then thinking about some different identity groups, there's lots of research and data about women finding networking particularly difficult. And I think there's some barriers there we have to be conscious about when it comes to parent and caring responsibilities and what we prioritise and how networking is done and when it happens. So there's research that says that more male applicants than female applicants going for a headship interview will go and do the networking visit and go and meet people and go and be a known person in the process. Women don't always prioritise that, so you're then disadvantaged when it comes to the actual interview itself. So seeing it as part of the process, I think, is really important. There are now amazing organisations doing events where there's a free crash, or you can bring your children. We always had family-friendly events when I was a head teacher. So removing some of those barriers that actually might inhibit a woman from actually coming, I think, is really important as well. So thinking about women, but also parents and carers, because obviously not all parents and carers are female, but thinking about those two groups, I think, is really important. And I think other groups to consider, if you're someone who networks or is considering networking or hosting space for networking, is the introvert and someone who is neurodivergent. Events can be really, really overwhelming. So having things like a quiet space, somewhere where you can go to. I always put on our events that you don't have to go to all the workshops, you go to the marketplace, we have a quiet room. So there's lots of things there to consider. And it might be that you want to have a tag person, someone you go with. I can remember meeting a brilliant CEO and head teacher from the Midlands who called themselves the Pincer Sisters, and they would go to conferences together. They'd have a list of the people they wanted to meet, and they would literally go up and like pincer the person who they wanted to talk to, and they had a bit of a strategy about doing that together. Okay, so maybe you do want to take people with you. That's going to help get you through the door and get you to stay at the event. I think there's a couple of slides left, Ben. I think my recap of my 7 tips is the next one. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so there's my 7 top tips for networking. Hopefully some of those top tips resonated, and there's some things that you consider. I think sort of like getting curious and checking in with yourself and challenging yourself to push out your comfort zone is really important. That's how we grow, and that's how we maximize the kind of the value we get out from networking. We don't want to get ourselves really knackered and really busy and then wonder why we're bothering, okay, if we're not actually fulfilling our goals at the end of it. Next slide, please. That's just my contact details. I'm pretty easy to find. Hannah Wilson's a pretty common name, but if you put Hannah Wilson, I'm quite prolific on most of the social media platforms. And I'm sure Ben and the team are going to share some links post-event. We have got an in-person event at Wolverhampton University coming up in July. Step Up or Not Gate Clashing, they've been invited to actually come and contribute at it. So they'll be in the marketplace and running a session. We'd love to see you there. And we've got lots of virtual ways we can connect as well. So thank you for having me and thank you for listening.
As always, Hannah, absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for that. And I was writing notes there because I thought, like you said, it was as if it was planned, but it wasn't planned. There were so many links there that we made. I think some of the key threads, just to pull them out, if I may, before we move on, like that intention, being intentional with networking. Like you say, one of the things we spoke about actually when we first set up the network, why we set that up, is because, like you said, if you were working in that corporate sector, there is the weekly drinks or the weekly coffee or the weekly lunch where everyone gets together. And actually in education, it's sort of seen as that add-on in some cases, that some people choose to, some people don't. And some roles tend to allow that more. So if you're a full-time classroom teacher, it actually allows you less of an opportunity than it would, say, a head teacher or a CEO. So I thought that was a really interesting one. And being really consistent and strategic as well. The amount of people that sometimes you can say they're going to contact you and don't end up contacting you and things like that, and actually making sure that you, like, and going back to your first point about that values alignment of making sure that you are networking in a way that you would wish to be networked with as well. And I really loved as well that mindfulness of managing your time, energy and expectations. I remember after our London event, which was absolutely awesome, having to put my phone down because it just kept pinging and pinging, and I was like, oh, I remember being in this hotel at like 8 o'clock at night. I was like, right, do you know what? I'm going to put my phone down for the rest of the evening now and put the TV on instead, or go for a walk, because it can take up a lot of time. And often it is time well spent. But like you said, sometimes if you're networking too much as well. And I really loved when you were talking about some of the barriers as well, because that's something we talk about as a network a lot. So one of the things you'll realise if you've been to one of our events is we collect diversity data afterwards. And that was because, and I remember having a conversation with you, Hannah, saying, oh, I don't think we get many parents coming to our events. And we had a bit of a chat around that. And actually, when I looked at all of our data across all of our events, we've actually got quite a lot of parents coming to us. So, but actually, how can we then improve it for other, for people who aren't attending, who are parents? or like you said, I remember there was a blog you wrote, I think it was a couple of years ago, where you put like a list together for event organisers of, have you got, for example, a quiet space, or have you got a prayer space, or a breastfeeding room, or disabled parking spaces, or seats near the front for people with a hearing impairment. And I would say, if you are, and we can share that out, I'm happy to share that out afterwards. If you are someone who is organising events, who's watching this, then definitely check out that blog because it's so useful. And as Hannah said, she has got a toolkit. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, Hannah, just before we move on. You've got a toolkit, and I know you did a blog recently about networking. If you want to just
yeah, sure. So I spent a lot of time training leaders and coaching leaders, and I tried to then provide resources and curate resources. So on my Hannah Wilson website, which is my leadership website, I've got a number of toolkits on there, and networking is one of the toolkits, and all the toolkits are formatted in the same way. One of the networks we just launched, myself and Malavilli, in the last few weeks, is educational entrepreneurs, because we both get contacted all the time by people who are doing a bit of side hustle and wanting to do some evenings and weekends, or have ideas for the future. Again, I didn't have 20 slots in my diary to have 20 meetings, so we decided to come together and create one space for all those people to come together. I think what's excited me over the last few years are how many grassroots groups there are, and how many different communities you can connect with. But I want to give a massive thank you and shout out to how slick this network is. Like, I'm someone who goes to a lot of events, and that London event was one of the slickest events I've been to. So well done for really practicing what you preach and modelling great leadership as well.
Thank you, and I really appreciate that. And I remember seeing that word slick came up quite a few times in our survey and our conversation afterwards. So it was great to see that. So thank you, Hannah, for speaking tonight and joining us. I really appreciate it, and sharing your wisdom. I have put the blog and on networking and the toolkit on networking in our chat, and we'll make sure that afterwards we share this with anyone that's attended the event and online as well as that other blog that I mentioned about organising events. So Hannah, enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will get ready to move on.
Well done, and happy birthday.
Thank you.